Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you enjoy true stories that blend power, betrayal, and the ultimate revenge. Let's begin. The chandelier sparkled above $1,000 plate dinner, the kind where everyone wore masks, metaphorically, of course. You could almost hear the wealth breathing through the marble floors of the Lotus Grand Ballroom in Singapore's Marina Bay Sands. It was the charity gala of the year, hosted by none other than Nathaniel Coe, a beloved name in international banking. He was the kind of man who shook hands with presidents and smiled like he had nothing to hide. I knew better. I knew everything. My name is Isabel Tan. To the crowd, I was just Nathaniel's wife, a former accountant who had long traded ledgers for lipstick. No one knew I had spent the last 5 years unraveling the web he and his family spun around me. And tonight, all of it, everything I had endured, documented, planned, was about to pay off. The night began like any other, picture perfect. The media lights were gentle, the air chilled, the string quartet played Vivaldi. I wore red. I always wore red when I wanted to be remembered. The speech Nathaniel gave about economic empowerment for women was ironic enough to make me dizzy. When he called me on stage to thank the woman who made all of this possible, I smiled. I even took his hand. But then, it happened. In front of ministers, CEOs, and socialites, Nathaniel leaned in and whispered through his teeth, "Wipe that smug look off your face. You're still nothing without me." And before I could react, his hand cut across my cheek like a match strike. The room fell silent. Gasps rippled. I heard the breath leave someone's lungs. I felt the sting. But I didn't flinch. I turned to him slowly and adjusted my earring. "Are you sure you want to do this, Nate?" I said it softly, like I was asking if he wanted tea. His face turned pale. That was the moment he realized. I wasn't crying. I wasn't running. I had been waiting. For 5 years, I had been documenting every illegal deal he made, every company he used to launder funds, every shell firm connected to his name. I had even traced payments to politicians, a few judges, and one particularly well-known news anchor. I had saved voice memos, screenshots, emails. And all of it was time-stamped, notarized, and secured in places not even he could reach. But this wasn't the moment for a scene. No. That would come later. Tonight, I needed him to feel safe one last time. I stepped down from the stage and returned to our table. His mother, Madame Go, looked horrified. His sister, Elena, wouldn't meet my eyes. But I noticed something flicker behind Elena's expression. Shame. Regret. Maybe something more. The rest of the dinner was a blur of awkward silences and confused glances. I excused myself early, kissed Nathaniel on the cheek, and whispered, "Check your email when you get home." He laughed nervously, pretending everything was fine. But I saw the vein pulsing at his temple. By the time I reached our penthouse, the first of many dominoes had already tipped. A flashback played in my head as I peeled off the red dress. I saw myself 3 years ago, sobbing in the pantry after Nathaniel berated me for serving his wine too warm. I remembered the time he locked the guest room door to punish me for speaking during a client dinner. I remembered the moment I realized I wasn't just married, I was imprisoned. That night, I sat on our rooftop garden and watched the city lights shimmer. I felt weightless, like I'd just slipped out of a skin I never chose to wear. Nathaniel hadn't noticed the subtle changes over the years, the locked drawer in my office, the second phone, the coded emails to a private investigator, the quiet meetings with regulators and whistleblower attorneys. I was careful. Too careful. By sunrise, he'd opened that email. It contained a zip folder labeled, "From your nothing wife." Inside. Everything. And I mean everything. Audio files, scanned documents, video footage, bank statements. His entire empire exposed. And just as I predicted, by 8 in the morning, there was a knock at the door. Not one, but two. The first was from the Commercial Affairs Department, White-Collar Crimes Division. The second. Elena. She was crying. I read the file, she said. I didn't know it was this bad. I want to help you. I didn't trust her. Not yet. But I let her in. The game had begun. And this time, I was the one making the rules. To be continued. The thing about luxury is that it's very good at hiding the cracks. From the outside, our lives look like a fairy tale. Nathaniel and I lived in a 2-story penthouse overlooking Marina Bay. Our art collection included original pieces from Warhol, Yayoi Kusama, and a rumored Banksy. My walk-in wardrobe was bigger than most people's entire apartments. There were private chefs, a live-in housekeeper, and a chauffeur who knew to never ask questions. But none of it was mine. It was his. And every mirror in that apartment reminded me of that fact. After the gala, news hadn't broken yet. But Nathaniel had already started to panic. I watched him pace the living room like a trapped wolf, barking orders into his phone. Find out who accessed my secure drive. Call Damien. Tell him to prepare the offshore backups. No, I don't care if it's 4 in the morning. Move. His voice echoed through the glass and steel like the clanging of chains. But I didn't flinch. I made tea. Jasmine, his least favorite. He didn't notice. When he finally paused to look at me, I tilted my head. Sleep well. He squinted. You think this is funny? No, I said. I think it's over. He didn't understand yet. Not really. Not until 2 hours later when the morning news quietly dropped a headline, Co-Holdings under scrutiny after anonymous leak. It was just a teaser. A warning shot. But his face turned ashen. Is this you? He whispered. Isabel. I shrugged. I didn't tell him I had help. That for the last 2 years, I'd been working with Laura Wen, a former forensic accountant turned whistleblower advisor. That I'd spent months building a timeline so tight and evidence so undeniable, even the best lawyers couldn't unravel it. I didn't tell him about the meeting I'd had with Inspector Roy Chin at CAD, where I handed over a drive labeled Project Phoenix. Or the private letter I sent to Minister Ong detailing the public implications if Co-Holdings was protected. I let him spiral. Meanwhile, Elena sat in my old office, tears still streaking her cheeks, holding a mug of tea she hadn't touched. He said you were dramatic. That you didn't understand business. I believed him. I know, I said. You weren't the only one. Madame Go called 3 times that morning. Nathaniel ignored her. But I picked up on the 4th ring. I need to speak to my son, she said stiffly. He's unavailable, I replied. Probably trying to delete things he thinks are still hidden. Isabel. Whatever this is, this tantrum, you are endangering everything. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. It's not a tantrum, I said. It's a spreadsheet. Would you like me to email it to you? Click. I went back to the living room where Nathaniel was pouring himself a drink. It was barely 9 a.m. You're going to lose everything, he growled. No, Nathaniel. You are. I lost everything a long time ago. My name, my voice, my freedom. I'm just taking it back. He threw the glass. It shattered near the balcony door. I didn't blink. That's when it hit him. I wasn't bluffing. The walls of that penthouse had once felt like a palace. But now, it was a cage. And I had the key. By noon, Co-Holding stock began to slide. Quiet emails circulated in legal departments. I received an encrypted message from Laura. They're trying to bury the news. Release phase 2. I typed back, yes. That afternoon, a second leak dropped on a global finance blog, one not afraid to name names. The article didn't just outline fraudulent transactions, it listed them. With timestamps. Beneficiaries. Account numbers. Even receipts. People started calling. Lawyers. Journalists. And 2 board members I'd never even met. Nathaniel turned on me fully then. The mask came off. You think anyone will believe you're the victim? You wore the diamonds. You signed the tax filings. You lived off the money. I looked him in the eye. Yes. And I kept the receipts. That night, he locked himself in his study. I heard him yelling on encrypted calls. I knew he was trying to spin a narrative. I was unstable, emotional, vindictive. He'd always said the same thing during arguments. You're imagining things, Isabel. Don't be dramatic. But this wasn't imagination. It was a PDF folder with 37 files and a digital signature. As the city lights flickered outside, Elena came to me with a folder. I found this in Mother's safe, she said. It's about you. Inside were old surveillance photos. Emails. Even a psychiatrist's report Nathaniel had forced me to attend, claiming I had delusions. I never knew she had kept it all. Why would she save this? Elena asked. Control, I replied. Just in case I ever stepped out of line. Elena looked at me. I want to testify. If this goes to court. I nodded slowly. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched as the illusion began to crumble. The gold-plated prison I had once called home was finally melting. And I was free. The first real fracture wasn't in the company or the stock market. It was in the silence. For years, Co Holdings had operated under a veil of curated perfection, polished press releases, spotless boardrooms, and smiling photos of the Co family at fundraisers. But beneath it all lay a rot so thick it only needed one crack to start oozing. That crack. Me. By the following morning, the news had shifted from rumors to headlines. Exclusive, insider documents suggest money laundering at Co Holdings. Charity gala scandal, did Nathaniel Co assault his wife? Whistleblower files spark government inquiry. And just like that, people started talking. Not just the public. People inside. Assistants. Accountants. Secretaries. People who had been waiting for someone, anyone, to go first. I was no longer alone. Nathaniel hadn't come out of the study in almost 12 hours. I assumed he was trying to salvage what he could. He probably thought he had time. He always did. That was his fatal flaw. Meanwhile, I was preparing for war. Laura came over that morning with 2 briefcases, one for legal coordination, and one for media. She was crisp, methodical, and completely unmoved by the chaos around us. You have about a 2-day window before the spin doctors kick in, she said. We need to move fast before they paint you as unstable or vindictive. They already have, I replied. But now you have proof. She handed me a tablet. On it was a secure folder titled Operation Helix. Inside were transcripts, photos, voice notes, corroborating testimonies from 3 other women. One of them was an intern. One had worked in acquisitions. And the third was someone I didn't expect. It was Mei Ling, Nathaniel's ex-fiancée. The one he always referred to as crazy. Her statement chilled me. Not because it was violent. Because it was almost identical to mine. The financial control. The belittling. The manipulation. I used to be someone, her note read. By the time I left Nathaniel, I didn't recognize myself. But I kept everything. Just in case. That was the moment I realized, he'd done this before. Many times. And I wasn't his first victim. I was just the one who stayed long enough to burn everything down. We compiled everything and prepared our legal submission to the Commercial Affairs Department. Laura insisted I stay anonymous for now, at least officially. She said the weight of the documents would speak louder than my name. But names mattered in the court of public opinion. And Nathaniel's name was already starting to rot. That afternoon, a quiet resignation was filed. One of Co-Holding's senior partners stepped down, citing health reasons. An hour later, a junior associate filed a whistleblower complaint with the Securities Commission. The floodgates were opening. Back in the penthouse, I finally walked into the study. Nathaniel looked like a ghost. He was sitting in the dark, sleeves rolled up, tie undone, surrounded by half-drunk glasses of whiskey and shredded papers. "You ruined everything," he muttered without looking at me. "No," I replied. "You did. I just turned on the light." He finally looked up at me, and for the first time in years, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Just fear. "I'll fix this," he said. "I always fix things. You can't fix this with a bribe or a press statement. You think people care about justice? They care about money." "Then I guess it's poetic," I whispered. "Because you're about to lose both." I left him there, and I didn't look back. The next day, my name hit the news. Not leaked, published. A calculated move by a journalist named Clarice Singh, someone Laura trusted. Exclusive, Isabel Tan, former accountant and wife of Nathaniel Coe, breaks silence, submits 5-year financial dossier. My face was everywhere. So were my tears from years ago, tears I never let anyone see. And now, they were fuel. That evening, I received an anonymous message. "Tell me what you need. I've waited years for someone to bring him down." It was signed, J.L. I had no idea who they were. But I had allies now. From the shadows. Even Elena started changing. She began going through old files, digging up the hidden accounts under Nathaniel's name. "He used my identity for one of these," she whispered, stunned. Madame Go, on the other hand, vanished from public view. Rumor had it she was in damage control meetings with corporate lawyers and trying to distance herself from the scandal. Classic. But something deeper began to unravel that week. Old business partners turned their backs. Clients pulled out. Even the foundation Nathaniel used to launder prestige, the Empower Initiative, froze its operations. And then came the internal memo. Leaked to the press. Subject line **** asset freeze inquiry. Pending investigation ****. Co-Holdings was collapsing. Slowly, then all at once. The man who once said I was just a wife who got lucky was watching his empire crumble, and all I did was keep records. As I sat in the now empty dining room, staring at the untouched table set for a dinner we never had, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. And I had only just begun. The first thing they tried to protect wasn't Nathaniel. It was the name. Coe. That surname had power in Singapore. It was stitched into the fabric of real estate, banking, media, and philanthropy. The Coes didn't just own wealth, they curated influence. And for years, they used that name to silence, suppress, and rewrite every truth that could bruise their porcelain reputation. But not this time. After the third leak went viral, Nathaniel's uncles called an emergency meeting. Not with him. With Madame Go, the matriarch, strategist, and unofficial fixer of the family. In public, she was elegance incarnate. In private, she was ruthless. I knew she wouldn't go down without trying to pull me with her. By then, Co Holdings had lost over 30% of its market value in 5 days. Banks were panicking. Investors were fleeing. Social media was flooded with people reposting financial documents they didn't even understand, because they didn't have to. They only needed to see Nathaniel's signature and my voice. I was no longer invisible. Elena returned from her office with 3 black folders she had pulled from the Co family archive. "They're from 20 years ago," she said, trembling. "Before Dad died. They've been hiding things longer than you think." Inside the folders were evidence of fund siphoning, bribes, even backdoor deals with foreign shell companies long before Nathaniel took over. One document listed Madame Go's name as a consultant to a now-defunct charity in the Cayman Islands. The kind of charity that never gave anything to the poor. Elena looked broken. "She groomed all of us," she whispered. "She trained us to lie." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just Nathaniel. This was generational rot. I stared at the evidence and thought about every family dinner I'd attended. The empty compliments. The sharp silences. The way they'd call me sweet and pretty but never smart. How Madame Go once told me, the best wives are the quiet ones. Now, the quiet one was the loudest voice in the room. That evening, I received a private message from an encrypted address. It was a recorded phone call, a conversation between Madame Go and a man named Richard Tan, her brother and a retired auditor. In it, she said, "We'll spin it. Say Isabel was mentally unstable. That she stole the documents. We'll float rumors of an affair. If we push hard enough, we can buy the media time to recover." I played the recording 3 times. Not out of shock. Out of certainty. Because deep down, I knew they would try to do exactly that. And they did. The next morning, a notorious gossip column posted an anonymous article, "Socialite Scorned, Did Isabel Tan Leak Fake Reports After Bitter Divorce Plans?" The timing was too perfect. The tone, too precise. I waited 3 hours. Then I responded. Not with a statement. With a video. I sat in a white room with no makeup, no edits. Just me, holding a thick binder. "Hi," I said calmly. "I'm Isabel Tan. And I'm not here to cry or beg for sympathy. I'm here to show you the truth." And for the next 11 minutes, I walked viewers through selected pages of financial abuse. I showed the joint accounts Nathaniel drained. The fake loans under my name. The offshore payments linked to silent board members. I didn't speak with rage. I spoke with numbers. And the internet exploded. By nightfall, my name was trending across Southeast Asia. But the most shocking response came not from the public, but from former employees of Co Holdings. People started coming forward. An HR director admitted she was pressured to falsify records. A junior analyst leaked internal emails showing how charitable funds were diverted to buy art for personal collections. Even a chauffeur shared a story about driving envelopes full of cash to ministers' homes. Elena and I built a secure portal. A digital wall of truth. By the end of the week, we had 27 submissions. And suddenly, the case wasn't just about my marriage. It was about a system. A family empire that had gotten away with everything, until now. Laura and I submitted the new files to the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau. She said we might be looking at the largest coordinated financial abuse case in years. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's silence became deafening. He had withdrawn completely, refusing all public comment. I imagined him locked in some luxury suite, surrounded by crumbling statements, legal notices, and ghosts. But Madame Go. She was preparing her counterstrike. I received a notice from a private investigator. Apparently, she had hired someone to dig into my past. They were trying to paint me as unstable, money-hungry, and cruel. I expected it. So I prepared. I released a second video. This time, I brought receipts, literal ones. Psychiatric evaluations showing no diagnosis. My personal financial records showing I never touched a cent beyond my allowance. I even published screenshots of Madame Go's own threats from years back, coded through email subject lines like, "Reminder to stay quiet." The public turned. Even high society began to whisper differently. The gala friends, the cocktail party wives, they no longer posted filtered group selfies with the Co's. Invitations stopped. Donations dried up. The family name, once golden, was now a cautionary tale. But the most surprising thing came one night when I opened my inbox. A message from a woman named Serena Wu. She wrote, "I dated Nathaniel in college. He was charming, until he wasn't. I have something you might want to see." Attached was a video file from 12 years ago. A conversation secretly recorded. In it, Nathaniel bragged about how easy it was to manipulate women. "You just break them in early," he said. "They'll cling to you like you're the only oxygen left." I sent the clip to Laura. She watched it once and said, "This will destroy him." But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Let them scramble. Let the family of liars bury themselves trying to protect the name. Because the next chapter wouldn't be about secrets. It would be about exposure. Every empire falls twice. First in silence. Then, in front of everyone. The first fall had already begun. Board members had resigned. Stocks had plummeted. Lawyers were fumbling behind closed doors. But the second fall, the public one, was still waiting. And I knew the moment had come to deliver it. It started with a message from Clarice Ng, the journalist who first broke the co-holdings leak. "Isabel," she wrote. "We're launching a primetime series on systemic abuse in elite families. We want you. Full story. Full name. Unfiltered. No edits." It was the kind of exposure I once feared. But not anymore. I agreed, on one condition. We don't just talk about Nathaniel. We talk about the system. The money. The manipulation. The lies that were never just behind our doors, but sewn into public policy, into nonprofit networks, into the very culture that celebrated the Co's while shaming women like me into silence. She agreed. For 2 days, I sat in a cold studio with a single camera, a single chair, and a timeline that spanned 5 years of my life. I spoke slowly. Clearly. I told them about the slap, yes, but also about the time he made me return a dress because it made me look too ambitious. About the birthday he canceled because a client needed a drink. About how his mother once handed me a pamphlet titled, "How to Be a Better Wife," with a handwritten note inside, "Try listening more." And then I showed them the evidence. On camera. Not just documents, but footage. Audio clips. I even played part of the 12-year-old video from Serena Wu, the one where Nathaniel said women were like oxygen. The room was silent when I finished. The producer cried. Clarice held my hand and said, "We'll air this on Sunday night." Sunday night came. It was called, "The Cost of Silence, Inside the Co Family Secret." Within 15 minutes, the internet was on fire. Hashtags exploded. My name trended globally. Other women came forward with their own stories, about other families, other husbands, other companies. I had started something I couldn't stop. Something I didn't want to stop. But behind the screen, in that penthouse Nathaniel once ruled like a throne room, the collapse was absolute. He was served with a formal arrest notice on Monday morning. Corporate fraud. Tax evasion. Money laundering. Domestic abuse. Coercive control, ***. All backed by the records I had kept like seeds in the dark. The police didn't come in sirens. They came in suits. Quiet. Precise. Just like I had been. I wasn't there to watch. But Elena was. She texted me one word, done. But Madame Go wasn't done. That same day, she filed an injunction. She was suing me for defamation, for breach of confidentiality, and for emotional damages. I laughed. Then I walked into court with my own counsel and a box. Inside were letters. Threats. Financial contracts signed by her hand. Emails from Richard Tan coordinating asset movements. The judge barely let her lawyer speak before dismissing the motion entirely. She left the courtroom without a word. But her legacy? It was in ruins. Philanthropic boards began removing her name. Museums pulled her portraits. Foundations issued quiet apologies. And for the first time in my adult life, I realized something. Power isn't taken all at once. It's unraveled. Thread by thread. That week, Laura and I met with government officials. They asked me if I wanted to push for a broader public inquiry, something that would open the door to prosecuting others involved. It would take time. Years maybe. But I said yes. Not because I needed more justice. Because I wanted no woman to ever walk the path I did alone again. Meanwhile, the messages didn't stop. Strangers wrote letters. A university invited me to speak. A survivors group asked if I'd sit on their board. I was no longer just Isabel Tan, the wife. I was Isabel Tan, the voice. But even with all of it, the press, the justice, the movement, there was still one moment that would define everything. A moment I didn't plan. It came quietly, like most important things do. I was walking down Orchard Road when I saw a woman staring at me from across the street. She looked at me for a long time, then mouthed a single word. "Thank you." And then she disappeared into the crowd. That was the moment I realized, revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't red dresses or courtroom wins. It was change. And change had finally come. But the story wasn't over yet. Because when you burn the mask, what's left beneath is the real face. And mine had only just begun to be seen. There is a strange kind of quiet that follows destruction. Not peace. Not calm. Just stillness. Like the moment after a hurricane passes, when everything is broken but the wind has stopped screaming. That was my world after the broadcast aired, after Nathaniel's arrest, after Madame Go's lawsuit crumbled in public. I thought I would feel free. But what I felt was unfamiliar. Unnamed. The phone kept ringing. Interviews. Invitations. Legal inquiries. Offers from publishers. Some wanted a book. Others wanted a movie. A few offered hush money, disguised as consulting opportunities to stay quiet. I declined them all. Instead, I sat alone in a quiet flat on the east side of Singapore, rented under my own name, paid with my own money. For the first time in a decade, I could breathe without asking permission. But even in the silence, the echoes remained. The late nights I cried in the bathtub with the tap running to muffle the sound. The days I flinched at footsteps down the hall. The ghost of his voice in every mirror, "You're nothing without me." Only now, the ghost was fading. Elena came to visit often. She brought updates from inside the firestorm. Co Holdings was being gutted. Investigations widened. Independent audits uncovered falsified statements going back almost 20 years. Authorities froze more accounts. Several silent partners were being questioned abroad. The old men are running scared, she said. It's like pulling back the walls of a temple and finding termites. Elena herself had changed. She no longer wore the polished, perfect facade of the co-daughter. She wore jeans. Laughed louder. Cried freely. She had found her own voice. Together, we decided to launch something new. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding. We called it the Ashlight Initiative, a program for women escaping financial and psychological abuse. We partnered with lawyers, therapists, and accountants. Our pilot group had 10 women. Then 30. Then over 100 on the waiting list. I gave talks, not just in boardrooms, but in shelters, in schools, in government circles. I told them the truth they never put in magazines, that abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves perfectly framed wedding photos and a credit card in someone else's name. The more I spoke, the more I healed. But the healing was jagged. There were nights I woke in cold sweat, thinking Nathaniel was standing over me. Days when my own voice trembled on the phone without warning. One afternoon, I opened a drawer and found an old ring he gave me. I stared at it for a long time before dropping it into the trash without ceremony. Laura helped me stay grounded. She had lived through her own fire, once. She knew the language of survivors: silence, apology, blame, and finally, truth. "You're not done," she told me one night as we walked past the river. "But you've begun." In the middle of all this, I received a letter. It was handwritten, pressed into creamy paper. From Madame Go. It read, _Isabel _ you've won. I will not fight you anymore _. What you did, it exposed more than just the business. It exposed me. And the version of motherhood I forced on Elena _. She speaks to me now. But I can feel her pity _. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it _. Just, leave the rest of the family out of it, if you can _. M.G _. I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply placed it inside a folder marked closure. Later that week, I saw Elena looking out across the marina from my flat. "She wrote you, didn't she?" Elena asked. "Yes." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. She's not the same woman anymore. Neither am I." A pause. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not destroying me with them." "I never wanted destruction, Elena. I just wanted the truth." And for once, the silence between us was not heavy. It was whole. In the months that followed, I spoke before Parliament. The government passed a motion to strengthen financial abuse protections. Isabel's Law, they called it in the papers. But I didn't need laws named after me. I needed one thing. Freedom. And I had it now. I walked streets I'd never been allowed to. I ate street food he used to call low class. I bought books with covers he once mocked. I painted my nails in wild colors and left the polish chipped. I danced, terribly, in my living room. The girl I used to be, the one who whispered apologies for existing, she was gone. In her place was someone unafraid of her own voice. Because once you speak, truly speak, you can never be silenced again. But the world wasn't finished speaking back. Because a woman in Jakarta had seen the broadcast and reached out. She was married to a man just like Nathaniel. And she had a plan. And just like that, the echo of my voice became a chorus. And we were just getting started. It began with one message. Then 5. Then 50. Women from all over Southeast Asia, Jakarta, Manila, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, were writing to me. Some anonymous, others using pseudonyms, and a few brave enough to send photos, names, and full case files. Each message carried a different story but the same theme: abuse wrapped in wealth. Power used as a leash. Silence worn like silk. Their husbands were CEOs. Judges. Diplomats. One woman said her father-in-law was a presidential advisor. Another revealed she hadn't accessed her own bank account in 7 years. He tells me what I can eat, what I wear, even when I can call my mother, she wrote. And everyone thinks he's a saint. I read every message. And with every line, I felt a fire reignite. What had happened to me wasn't an isolated storm. It was part of a system, a network of entitlement, protection, and generational silence. The Coes were not alone. They were one tentacle of a much larger beast. Elena and I brought Laura into the loop. This can't be solved with just a campaign, I told them. We need infrastructure. We need a map of the rot. So we built one. Using encrypted platforms, we invited women to submit their stories, their documents, their patterns of abuse. Laura created an algorithm to track overlapping names, entities, and bank transfers. Within weeks, we had mapped connections between at least 6 prominent families, all interlinked through business deals, shell companies, and shared legal teams. They called themselves the Sovereign Circle, a private coalition of ultra-wealthy families who ensured each other's secrets stayed buried. And I had just started digging them up. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was resistance. But resistance makes enemies. One morning, I found my front gate open. The security camera was disabled. Nothing was taken. Nothing touched. Just a message etched into my door with a knife. Stop while you can. I took a photo. Then I laughed. Not out of fear, but clarity. The old Isabel would have trembled. This version of me. She made a call to Inspector Roy Chin. 2 hours later, the apartment was swarming with quiet men in suits and silent earpieces. No sirens. Just action. The message had failed. I posted a photo of it online, without comment. Just the image. Let them know I wasn't hiding. That same day, I received a call from someone who refused to give their name. A woman. Her voice was shaky but urgent. He hurt my daughter. He threatened me. But I have proof. I want to give it to you, not the police. Why not them? I asked. Because the police report disappeared. Twice. She was from a powerful tech family in Jakarta. I verified her name. Her husband had invested in one of Nathaniel's failed crypto ventures. The web was wider than I thought. We met in a hotel lobby in Bangkok. Neutral ground. She handed me a USB. Her hands were trembling so badly, I wrapped mine around hers and whispered, "You're safe now." Inside the drive were files. Hundreds. Photos. Emails. Hidden audio recordings. It wasn't just domestic abuse, it was trafficking. Money laundering. Blackmail. And names I recognized from gala invitations I used to smile through. I sat in my room that night, staring at the skyline, and I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a few bad men. This was a machine. And I had thrown a wrench into its gears. But I wasn't alone anymore. Elena had grown more vocal. She spoke on panels, sat on task forces, even went toe-to-toe with her mother in a private family hearing. "I'm not protecting your shame anymore," she told Madame Go, whose face reportedly turned to stone. Laura built a network of volunteer analysts, accountants, lawyers, survivors, even retired journalists. They called themselves the lanterns, their job. To shine light in places power liked to keep dark. Together, we launched Project Umbra, an international collaboration to document, expose, and disrupt high-level financial and psychological abuse rings under the guise of elite families. And just when we thought we were ahead, the sovereign circle struck back. A lawyer representing 4 of the 6 families filed a cease and desist against Ashlight Initiative, accusing us of slander, libel, and of fomenting dangerous rebellion against family values. We held a press conference. I walked up to the mic in a simple white blouse. No makeup. No jewelry. Just a black folder in my hands. Inside, 29 testimonies. 6 whistleblower affidavits. And 1 audio clip of a Sovereign Circle member admitting to paying off a judge. I handed it to the media. No anger. No fear. Just evidence. The next morning, the court threw out the cease and desist. The headlines were no longer about Isabel Tan. They were about an underground movement of women refusing to stay quiet. About abuse no longer hiding behind charity fundraisers and private jets. About a system cracking under its own secrets. And as the news spread across Asia, more women came forward. 1 in Vietnam. 1 in Dubai. 2 in Hong Kong. And 1 chilling message from a woman in Seoul. They're watching me. But I'm watching them now, too. The silence wasn't silent anymore. It was humming. And I had become the frequency. When glass shatters, it doesn't scream. It cracks in silence, and then everything falls. That's exactly what happened when the first indictment dropped. It wasn't Nathaniel's name on it this time. It was Tan Yuliang, the billionaire patriarch of a tech empire and a founding member of the Sovereign Circle. The charge: financial conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and coercion involving transnational exploitation. For years, he had been a myth. A shadow figure whose name rarely appeared in media. But Project Umbra had traced his fingerprints across dozens of silent transactions, all buried under layers of offshore anonymity. When he was taken into custody, the footage leaked. A man once pictured with presidents and UN delegates, now walking in handcuffs past flashing cameras. His silence was no longer power, it was panic. The news spread like wildfire. And it ignited fear in every corner of the circle. Suddenly, the glass houses of these powerful men became visible, thin, brittle, and full of cracks. The public started asking questions. Media outlets, once loyal to these families, flipped to survive. Journalists dug deeper. Governments began quietly cooperating across borders. I watched from my quiet flat as the web trembled. But I wasn't untouched. One morning, as I opened my laptop, a virus locked my screen. Files encrypted. Access denied. A flashing message: this is your last warning. Laura and our cyber team worked overnight to restore everything. Thanks to our redundancies, nothing was permanently lost. But it was a message. They were scared. And desperation is dangerous. We increased security. Encrypted everything. Shifted servers offshore. Elena even moved into a safe house for a week after her car's brake lines were mysteriously damaged. But we didn't stop. We leaked a new dossier, anonymized but damning, proving ties between 3 sovereign families and international shipping companies that had been used to transport everything from untraceable cash to stolen art. And worse. The ripple effects were immediate. Luxury homes were raided in the early hours. Customs officials were suspended. Interpol joined the investigation. And in a boardroom 20 floors above Orchard Road, a man screamed into a phone, "Shut it down. Shut it all down." Because the fire had jumped from one house of glass to another. And nothing spreads like truth once it catches air. Back in my world, things were quieter, but not easier. My face had become symbolic. To some, I was a hero. To others, a traitor. Women's rights groups celebrated me. Conservative figures painted me as a danger to the sanctity of family. One article called me the angel of collapse, suggesting I had single-handedly toppled the region's elite moral structure. I didn't care. I had never wanted fame. Only freedom. But the pressure wore on me. I had nightmares. Woke up gasping, hands shaking, thinking I was back in that penthouse with Nathaniel whispering threats behind smiles. Therapy helped. So did the messages from women I'd never meet. You saved my life. I thought I was crazy until I heard your story. I left him last night. Each message was a candle in the darkness. And then came a letter. A real one. Handwritten. From prison. Nathaniel. He wrote 4 pages. I read them once. He never apologized. Only rationalized. He said I had destroyed a dynasty. He said I'd always be alone because no man would trust a woman like me again. And he ended it with, I hope it was worth it. I folded the letter. Set it on fire. Watched it burn in a ceramic bowl on my balcony until there was nothing left but ash and silence. It was worth it. Because that same day, a woman in Manila released a video of her own. She didn't use a pseudonym. She used her name. Her face. I'm not hiding anymore, she said. Because Isabel didn't. And the floodgates opened again. Dozens of women followed. A wave. A reckoning. The fire had jumped oceans. And the sovereign circle. They were watching their empires crumble. One board resignation. One lawsuit. One survivor at a time. What started as my escape had become a movement. One I never meant to lead, but could no longer abandon. Because glass houses don't just shatter. They cut. And now the world was bleeding truth. And for once, no one was looking away. Silence used to be my shield. Now, it was theirs. And it was coming undone. Every court date, every headline, every survivor who dared to speak made one thing clear. What we once whispered in private was now broadcast in every corner of power. What they used to laugh off as family matters had become matters of state. The undoing began in courtrooms. First, a tribunal in Kuala Lumpur ordered a full audit of the Zhao Trust, one of the circle's major financial vessels. The trust collapsed within weeks. Then, in Jakarta, a judge allowed 6 survivors to testify anonymously against a corporate tycoon long thought untouchable. But the most important courtroom moment happened in Singapore. It was the trial of Nathaniel Ko. The man who once sat at the top of the Ko empire, wrapped in wealth and arrogance, now stood behind a desk in handcuffs, flanked by lawyers who looked more exhausted than confident. I attended the trial. Quietly. I sat in the 3rd row. No cameras. No statement. Just presence. He saw me. And for the first time in our lives, he looked away. The prosecution outlined the evidence. Not just my documentation, but accounts from former staff, whistleblower analysts, and even former partners who chose immunity over loyalty. Emails. Wire transfers. Digital trails. Survivor testimony. It was no longer a personal case, it was precedent. The courtroom wasn't just about Nathaniel. It was about every man who believed silence was loyalty. His defense tried everything. Mental health. Stress. Miscommunication. They even blamed me, calling me a vindictive ex-wife with a vendetta. But then Elena testified. She walked into that courtroom with her back straight, voice steady. "He didn't just manipulate Isabel," she said. "He manipulated us all. I saw it. I lived in it. And I believed it. But not anymore." Gasps echoed. Madame Go wasn't present. But her absence was louder than any testimony. 3 days later, the verdict came in. Guilty. Nathaniel was sentenced to 15 years, with no parole for the first 10. The courtroom was silent. And then, slowly, applause broke out, not loud, not dramatic, just soft, persistent. Like rain starting to fall. I didn't cry. I just stood. Walked out. Breathed in the sunlight. It was over. At least, that part. But the world had changed. Project Umbra had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. It had offices in 3 countries. Anonymous hotlines. Pro bono legal partners. Survivors were being hired as staff, mentors, educators. Ashlight Initiative merged with 2 other foundations. Together, we built the Phoenix Network, focused on financial literacy and exit strategies for women trapped in abusive power dynamics. I spoke at the UN. Not as a victim. As a systems builder. My voice, once too small to be heard over a man's ego, was now echoed by thousands. Still, I had moments of quiet reflection. One night, I returned to the old ballroom. The Lotus Grand. The place where it all began. Where the slap happened. Where the mask cracked. They were hosting another gala. This time, it was for survivors. They invited me to speak. I stood at the very podium where Nathaniel once held my hand in a performance of love and control. And I said, "The truth is not loud. It is patient. It waits beneath the surface of power. And when it rises, no amount of money or silence can stop it." The room stood still. Then they stood up. Not for me. For themselves. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told to be quiet. To shrink. To endure. And now, they were the ones speaking. The movement had reached governments, schools, corporations. Policies were being rewritten. Old money was under scrutiny. Power was being redefined. Not as dominance. But as accountability. And through it all, I kept walking forward. One step at a time. Until I stopped being afraid of echoes. Until silence no longer felt like a threat. But a choice. And I chose to break it. Some mirrors never shatter from a single blow. They crack. Thin lines spreading slowly, silently, until one day the whole thing collapses with the lightest touch. That day came without warning. It was a Monday morning when my face was everywhere again, not because of the trial, or Project Umbra, or even the newest policy passed in my name. It was because someone leaked the internal files of the Sovereign Circle. Not an article. Not a rumor. But the entire digital archive. Emails. Contracts. Meeting minutes. Membership lists. It landed on a global transparency site like a meteor. Within hours, journalists across 6 countries were sorting through the fallout. Everything that had once been whispered in locked rooms was now on display. Corruption linked to humanitarian aid programs. Abuse settlements paid through shell charities. Strategic marriages arranged to protect assets. And names, dozens of them. Men and women. Politicians. CEOs. Celebrities. Religious leaders. The machine had been gutted. And for the first time, people couldn't look away. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. The world had picked up the torch. Still, my phone rang all day. Survivors asking if it was safe to come forward. Lawyers scrambling to offer statements. Networks requesting interviews. But amidst the noise, there was one call that stopped me cold. It was Serena Wu. The woman who had once sent me that devastating clip of Nathaniel in college. "I need to see you," she said. "There's something I've never told anyone." We met at a quiet cafe by the sea. Serena looked different. Stronger. Like someone who had stopped flinching. "I kept something," she said, sliding a USB across the table. "Not just about Nathaniel. About Richard Tan. About their early funding. You need to see it." The files showed something I'd never known. Nathaniel's rise hadn't just been supported by family funds. It had been engineered through insider trading, offshore bribes, and a scandal involving a fake environmental startup used to launder over $8 million. This wasn't just personal corruption. It was foundational. The very empire he stood on had been built with stolen money and silence. And I had just been the first one to yell loud enough for others to look. Laura and our team verified the files. We submitted them to regulators, prosecutors, and a global journalism consortium. The media called it the Co-Papers. And once again, the dominoes fell. Richard Tan was arrested in Hong Kong trying to board a private jet. 2 government officials resigned within 48 hours. 10 new survivors filed claims under Umbra's protection. And the world, finally, began to understand. This wasn't about a woman scorned. This was about the disease of power unchecked. One headline read, "The women who burned the crown, and built a bridge in its place." I didn't ask for the crown. But I accepted the bridge. Because in its place, survivors were walking, out of silence, out of shame, into power. Still, with all the momentum, there was one thing left. Closure. It came quietly. In the form of a letter. From a young woman in law school. She had grown up watching her father control her mother. She said she used to think it was normal. Expected. Even admirable. Until she saw my story. Now, she was studying to become a prosecutor. She ended the letter with a line I'll never forget. "You cracked the mirror. I plan to keep breaking it until no one else can bleed from it again." I folded the letter and placed it beside the one I had burned from Nathaniel. A contrast. A completion. The fire that had once nearly consumed me had become light. I stood before my mirror that night, one of my own choosing. I saw the lines on my face. The strength behind my eyes. The freedom in my posture. I was not broken. I had broken free. And the mirror. It finally reflected me. Not as a survivor. But as a builder. A fighter. And most of all, as a woman who would never, ever be silenced again. Movements aren't born in parliaments or courtrooms. They're born in kitchens. In whispered phone calls after midnight. In bruises covered with makeup. In bank accounts someone else controls. In voices that say, "It's fine, I'm fine," when they're anything but. And from those small moments of surviving, comes something stronger. Something louder. Something permanent. We rise. By the end of the year, Project Umbra had expanded to 12 countries, with satellite hubs in Nairobi, Sao Paulo, and Warsaw. What started as one woman's escape from abuse had become a global coalition, threading survivors together like constellations, each one shining because another dared to. The laws began to change. In Singapore, coercive control was formally recognized as a prosecutable offense. In the Philippines, legislation passed to freeze financial assets controlled by abusers during divorce proceedings. In South Korea, domestic psychological abuse was no longer considered private family discipline, but criminal behavior. And everywhere, women were telling their stories. Without disguises. Without shame. Just truth. Meanwhile, I returned to my life, not as it was, but as I chose it. No more hiding. I lectured at universities, consulted for lawmakers, even sat on a UN panel discussing gendered economic violence. But my favorite days were quieter. Lunch with Elena, who now ran her own legal clinic for daughters trapped by inheritance games. Long walks with Laura, still our steel-hearted anchor, who finally let herself take a vacation for the first time in 5 years. Coffee with Clarice, the journalist who gave me a microphone when no one else would. And visits to Ashlight survivor workshops, where women like Mei-Ling and Serena had become mentors, guides, sisters. I bought a home. Nothing extravagant. A terrace house with flowering vines and a kitchen I actually cooked in. The walls weren't white and silent, they were full of music, warmth, and laughter. Mine. I planted a garden. Peonies. Not because they were pretty, but because they bloom boldly and die proudly, only to return again, fuller. Stronger. Like us. One day, I sat down to write everything. Not the numbers. Not the court documents. The in-betweens. The nights I shook but kept going. The mornings I woke up and reminded myself I was no longer his. The joy of buying my own groceries with my own card. The victory of laughing without permission. I called the manuscript Ash and Honey. It wasn't about revenge. It was about alchemy. About how the worst parts of our lives can be burned, sifted, and mixed into something new. Sweet. Strong. Unmistakably ours. And just before I closed the final chapter, I added one more page. A letter. To the next woman. The next fighter. The next voice rising out of the rubble. Dear you. You are not dramatic. You are not ungrateful. You are not too loud. You are awakening. And you are not alone. Because I had learned that even in the dark, even beneath the weight of years of control and silence, something fierce survives. Hope. And hope, once spoken aloud, doesn't just survive. It multiplies. And now. It roars. We are not finished. We are not afraid. We are not asking anymore. We are rising. And we are bringing the house down with us if we have to. Because no one builds empires on our backs anymore. Not without consequence. Not without resistance. Not without fire. And from that fire, we rise.